Hi Terry, thank you for joining me on the podcast. How are you doing?
Yeah, no problem. Monday, so it's always a slow starter for my brain. Having said that, I'm 65 now, so every day is a bit of a slow starter.
Well, I wanted to go back to like your childhood and growing up. What was that like growing up in Manchester?
Well, I grew up in an area called Old Trafford. There you go, Manchester 16, but down the end closest to the city centre called Brook Spa, which bordered Moss Side, Whalley Range, and Hume. So we were basically I think it's exactly 1.1 miles from Manchester city centre, where I grew up, just south. In fact, I don't think anybody else in the media, is from Manchester or say they're from Manchester, grew up as close to the city centre as me.
Really, yeah.
There's the odd musician who did, maybe Denise Johnson out of Primal Scream, but she was only about a 5 minute walk away from me, but heading towards town. And MC Tunes out of 808, who sang with 808 State and all of that. He lived a little bit closer.
Well, like you mentioned these people here, obviously Manchester became like a massive city for music and entertainment. Did you know that like any of these growing up?
Well, yeah, but the weird thing for me is because I'm the age that I was when I was 16. I mean, Manchester had a vibe about it, albeit a little bit rough. So it had great nightlife, where you could go and drink underage, as in, because of the punk scene when that happened in 76, 77, because it only lasted a short amount of time. And promoters were putting gigs on all the time in places. And in those days, the main band didn't go on stage until midnight. So if you could get in, and they'd just let you in because they had to pay for the PA and pay for the bands. So they didn't give a shit how old you were. They just invite you in, let you come in. So you'd be there being able to stay up till 2 in the morning in clubs like Rafters, aged like 16. And I looked about 12 when I was 16. Um, so that was great. But we didn't have a music. I mean, Manchester back then, I mean, it had a reputation for having the most nightclubs per head of population of anywhere in the United Kingdom. And so it had a lively nightlife in terms of going out for music, kind of discos and all that kind of stuff, and good specialist music areas. But music wise, I mean, we'd had a lot of big pop bands in the 60s, but in the 70s, very little. We had 10cc, who were a great and cool band, but they didn't have that mass appeal because they didn't really have a focal point. They didn't have a lead singer. They had like three different guys who did lead vocals. So every song they put out was a different guy singing the lead vocals. And they didn't really tour. They were more of a studio band. They were quite hip. Um, and then we had, the first ever black British number one, Sweet Sensation, Sad Sweet Dreamer. That was September 1974, but there wasn't an awful lot happening. And then suddenly you had the punk thing happened, and then Buzzcocks. And I was actually at primary school and secondary school with John Marr, who was the drummer out of Buzzcocks. So I remember him. He started the lower six with us, and I think he left around Easter time of the first year, the lower six, to go full time with the Buzzcocks, aged like 16. You know what I mean? Great drummer.
Yeah, yeah.
But that was John Marr, spelled Maher, and Johnny Marr out of the Smiths. His name is spelt the same way,
Mm.
Maher. But so people in the early days didn't get him confused with John Marr out of Buzzcocks. He changed it to a phonetic spelling, Marr, because a lot of people would say Maher instead of Marr. He wouldn't have liked that. After that punk thing, then you start to see this sort of scene, this mini scene blossom in Manchester, which didn't become huge except for maybe Joy Division and Magazine. But, Buzzcocks were on top of the pops 3 or 4 times. And they were big because they were the first truly independent band in Britain. When they did the Spiral Scratch EP. I mean, I remember kids buying it when I was at school. John Marr would bring a load in his bag, £1.20 each, which was a lot of money in them days, because it's a 4 track EP. Within a year, 30 quid, 35 quid. And you're going, damn, I should have bought it. I mean, that'd be more than a week's wages at that, in that era, for someone young like us. And then, So then you got all these other bands coming out at the Fall, of course, Joy Division, Magazine, who were a split from the Buzzcocks, and they were the first post-punk bands. And from there, it all flowered. You got the Smiths, then you had bands like Simply Red coming through, So into the 80s, but we'd never had that scene before. And then the dominance, the way Manchester bands really dominated from like 1989 onwards. And
Mm.
this was all before my time. We were behind Liverpool in the cool stakes. It was almost like Man United and Liverpool football clubs before Alex Ferguson came in. And a lot of it was down to the late, great Tony Wilson, who almost like manifested it. He believed so much in Manchester. He'd be telling you how cool this place was, and he'd be going, "Where I live is a shithole. No one's got any money." You know what I mean? And it was. Manchester was kind of rough and poor and had been devastated by Margaret Thatcher and, what the Tories had done. And then you've got this guy telling you all the time that where you live is cool. And you're going, well, I think you're talking out of your backside, mate. But somehow by saying it a lot, he brought it into reality. I mean, when he opened the Hacienda in like, when is it, 1982? Was it Aprilish time or something like that? And it's this idea that we needed this big New York style alternative disco type place. And you're thinking, well, but it wasn't built for the comfort for that type of thing, for dance music, really. I mean, it was playing like pop music and everything, but there wasn't a big enough indie type crowd for that. The sound was awful in there. So although it held about 1,500 people, they had no proper stage. So when he did put bands on, often the bands, except for when New Order played there and Lee Scratch Perry, weren't big enough for the venue. So you get bands that would do well at a venue that would hold 250 or 400, echoing around the place in the Hacienda on a Thursday night. And 400 people in the Hacienda on a Thursday night looked like 30 in a normal club. It looked empty, and it'd all be like with all the concrete surfaces and high ceilings, the sound would be dreadful, it'd be echoing all over the place. So again, it was almost like if you believe enough, eventually it'll happen. And it was almost as if he manifested this scene in a way, or the start of it, even in terms of bands kicking against it. It was like, yeah, he's kind of central because even, the bands who ended up becoming really big, like the Stone Roses, they hated Tony and he hated them because they were being managed by his ex-missus, Lindsay Reed.
Did you see Tony Wilson a lot then around Manchester?
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I first met him when I was 16, maybe 17. And again, it was an underage drinking thing because, I mean, I'm from a big Irish family. Mum and dad were Dubliners. And they'd have Irish clubs. In Old Trafford, we had a Polish club on Shrewsbury Street. Then we had, on the border of Old Trafford and Hume, there was St. Brendan's Irish Club. And these were like places where you could drink with a PG certificate. As long as you were with an adult, you were allowed to drink there from about the age of 14. So St. Alphonsus, my local Catholic church, and then our old primary school, they used to use the school hall at the primary school for these parish dances about, 4 times a year, put on by our local priest who's still knocking around, Father McMahon. And he was from, I think, Fermanagh in Northern Ireland, but he was a great businessman. So we'd have the Ranch's show band on. It cost you like a quid 50 to get in, but then you could drink all night. And you had to sort of dress as if you were going to mass or something, in like a jacket and trousers, no jeans. And I just remember being there with these mates of mine. And suddenly Tony Wilson walks in. Now, this would be like 1977. Tony Wilson walks in with his first wife, Lindsay Reed, who's still a mate of mine. And they're all dressed in like, black leather jackets. He's got like leather trousers on. She was wearing like skin tight black jeans. And they look really Hollywood and glamorous. And then I collared him on the way out, saying, why don't you put more reggae on So It Goes or whatever, because it just had the Buzzcocks on. Sorry, just had Steel Pulse on. It was the greatest British reggae band ever from Birmingham. And it had them on, filmed at the Electric Circus. I think they ended up supporting the Clash. They live in America now. They became massive in America, Steel Pulse. Brilliant band. And then that was the first conversation I had with him. And then years later, obviously, when I was in Derby and I was managing bands I'd always ring him up to get in the and he'd always answer the phone. And I thought that was normal, that someone really famous just answer the phone and chat to you for 10 minutes. And then obviously when I moved back up to Manchester in 1988, I interviewed him there, and I was actually going to do a proper documentary series about Factory Records, and this was in 1988. And then I ended up doing a TV show with him for 2 years. Turn on Terry, that used to be on at like 1 o'clock in the morning on ITV. Alison Hammond used to be on it once every 2 weeks with us. Whatever
Yeah.
happened to her? That was her first TV show. I mean, funny enough, we'd always go out afterwards, but she on the slide found herself a boyfriend in Manchester, and that's who she used to sneak off to go and see him. And he worked at a restaurant in the Trafford Centre, and that's who she ended up having a kid with.
Oh, really?
So her son is as a result of the time in Manchester.
So you got your break really through Devil's Advocate. What do you think it was that like got you onto Radio Derby from that?
Well, it was just so bizarre. I mean, look, I came from a background where we were that poor. At school, I remember like not being able to go on a school trip when I was 7 to Chester Zoo because it cost 7 and 6. That's old money. Do you know how much that is in 37.5p?
Really?
Yeah. I remember when I was in the first year at St. Bede's at Easter time, there was, I think it was like a week long trip to stay in this youth hostel in the Lake District in Keswick, and it was £10 each. And I didn't even bother asking my mum
Mm.
because it was one of them where you knew she did. My mum used to say, if you asked her once, she'd go, "Stop mithering me." Now, mithering is like pestering, isn't it? It's like an Irish way
Yeah.
of pestering. That means you've got to have asked at least twice, haven't you? If not 4 or 5 times, but stop that. So that's how poor we were. So our big things, growing up, was the library. My mum was very keen on that because as a kid, she'd moved over with her family. She was one of 8 from Dublin to Manchester when she was only 4. And she was the 7th of 8 kids. But she actually passed through 11 plus. But her dad had just died and they didn't have much money anyway. And in those days, before World War II, before the Education Act, thanks to the Labour government of 1945, if you went to grammar school, you had to buy your own textbooks and buy your own uniform. There was no help from the council or anyone else. And the textbooks were relatively expensive in those days. Even normal books were relatively expensive, in the 1930s, 1920s. That's why libraries became a thing. They became a big thing. A lot of it sprouting from the Education Act in 1945, local libraries. And so my mum was very keen on education. So we all joined the library. We used to go to the library every Saturday. And obviously, once you're in there and you've got older brothers and sisters who seem to be reading all the time, and there were no pictures in the books they were reading. Like our Tony was 8 years older than me, but they didn't always have great front covers. Because he was really into reading Edgar Wallace books, and it was always like, sort of detective novels set in colonial Africa in the 1920s or westerns and stuff like that, with always great covers or science fiction books. And so we just reading a lot. So I ended up going to Polytechnic to do applied biology, Thames Poly in London. And that's when I first started DJing. So I used to DJ. I was staying in halls of residence about 4 miles out. And I used to DJ on a Tuesday night. And then you'd be drinking and all that. Finish at 1. So I never got up for lectures on a Wednesday morning. So the lectures on a Wednesday morning were organic chemistry and this awful computing course called Fortran. I don't know whatever statistics, and you needed that for biology, And then it was games on. So I wasn't playing football or doing anything like that. So I used to just give Wednesday mornings a miss. And because it was a sandwich course where you went out to work after the second year for a year, you had to pass all your exams. We actually had second year exams. No other course did. You did first year exams, and then you did them for your finals. But on a sandwich course at a polytechnic, you had second year exams, so that you could say, look how well he's doing, and get yourself a decent job working, for one of the hospital labs or something like that, or some big brewing company or food production company. And I failed. If you failed one unit, and you took like 12, 13 units, if you failed one, you resat that one in September. So if I'd failed Fortran, I would have resat that. And you thought, well, that won't ruin me with summer holidays. I failed. If you failed two, you had to sit all 12 or 13 again.
Jesus.
So I failed. The two I failed were organic chemistry and thingy. And so basically, I couldn't face resitting them all. So I transferred on the final year of an HND course, from a degree course at Manchester Poly. And when I finished there, obviously Thatcher had come and just annihilated everything. So there were no jobs. Manchester was the worst affected place at that time. She shut down, she lifted all the tariffs on imports of textiles from India and places like that. So that wiped out the textile industry in the whole of the Northwest. You think of those towns like Rochdale, Burnley, all of those destroyed by it, never recovered since. And then also a lot of the heavy engineering in Manchester, printing, and obviously then cutting back on the NHS. So there were less jobs going in the labs, there weren't the apprenticeships, there was just nothing around. So I was on the dole, and then and I was staying in bed till 2 o'clock every afternoon. And I was back living at home with my mum and dad in our old council house, and everyone else had left. You know what I mean? So there's only me back there, age 21. Our Kev had got off to uni in Lancaster. Oh no, I think our Sheila had gone as well. She'd gone off to Durham, and so there was just me there at home with no job. And I'd still be in bed at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And my mum used to do the school dinners at my old primary school. Come home, see me in bed, and start going mad, or just getting up and going mad at me. And what happened was when she was going in, she was complaining about me to a woman who lived around the corner, this Irish woman, Mrs. Flanagan. And her oldest lad ran an unemployed youth group called the Young Christian Workers in Trafford Park, tied up with the St. Anthony's Catholic Church there. And she was telling him about it. And he'd just been asked to get loads of kids who were on the dole to take part in this ITV show, Devil's Advocate, made by the World in Action team. So they were quite a heavy sort of news. They did all the big investigative journalism, World in Action. And what had happened was there'd been riots in 1981, proper big riots in Brixton, Toxteth, Moss Side, Handsworth in Birmingham, St. Paul's in Bristol. And one of the major causes was the high rate of youth unemployment. And they decided to pick Manchester because it was the place that had been most affected by Margaret Thatcher's thing. So when I got offered this to go on there, I went on with all these other kids aged between 16 and 21. But I'd spent all my life in the library, and I was quite political because my mum and dad were quite, proper Labour. My dad was a trade unionist. And then I got into, reading all the stuff, my resentment because I couldn't afford to, even the basics at school. And I went to a good grammar school where everyone else was posher than me. So I was quite political. And it's weird to see those clips now and go, well, actually, I was, because I remembered stuff. I mean, a bit ADHD. So I'd be going on and going, George, I remember being almost on Vicar once and say, well, George Orwell once described the Church of England as a Tory party at prayer. And little snipey things like that. This is in a day when there was only 3 channels, and this was on at 20 to 7 on a Sunday night, when there was nothing else on to watch, only Songs of Praise or the Money programme on BBC Two. So if you wanted to watch the telly, between 20 to 7 and 7:15 or whatever on a Sunday night, you're going to watch a load of like unemployed kids from Manchester, you know what I mean, spouting off and everything. And it was quite funny, Devil's Advocate. So obviously Johnny Marr was on there when he was only 17. So I used to chat to him because he was into the local bands and all that kind of stuff. Um, Other people on there, they did a follow up 2 years later for a World in Action special, a kind of Where Are They Now in 1983. And I think something like two-thirds of the girls on it had all become single mums. Well, you wouldn't have had anyone like Matt Goodwin moaning about not having enough babies back in those days. I think over a third of the lads were in prison.
Jeez, yeah.
Hey, one of them for murder. And what is, this is inner city Manchester back in the day, you know. Now they're making out like Britain is crime ridden. Not compared to then, it isn't. And then the big success stories was Johnny Marr in the Smiths. It only really just released this charming man. Do you know what I mean?
Jeez, yeah,
And me working at BBC Radio Derby, you know, with my own show. But so it was interesting. Do you know what I mean? It was all by accident. And in some ways, you know, if you think I started at Radio Derby December the 7th, 1981, and I still do bits in the media now. So it's what, 45 years ago?
yeah, yeah.
Bloody hell, nearly 45 years ago. And I've still not met anyone from a similar background to me in the media.
Really?
Well, even the other working class kids that you meet were slightly better off. So the dads had a car, or they were only child. They weren't political. Do you know what I mean? They weren't anyone who would rock the boat, and they weren't as in a city as me, and they didn't grow up in areas that were immigrant areas like mine. You know, I mean, I'm 65, but my next door neighbours from the age of 0 to like 12 were West Indian. You know, Jamaican. The Reeds, they lived next door. I mean, I remember, you know, because we lived in like houses with outside toilets, you'd always keep one room of the house clean. No one was allowed in it. We used to call it the parlour, which is a bit grand considering, but pain of death, you went in there. You know, so it was kept strictly for visitors. And I remember like Mrs. Reed next door, and they were a young Jamaican couple, and she'd be in our parlour, our front room loads, because my mum was teaching her how to knit and crochet, you know, so she could get baby clothes ready for the baby. And then obviously my mum was quite nosy, would chat to her. And so we never had that kind of racism growing up. And then obviously, you know, I had best mates from the age of like 4 or 5, you know, who were like, you know, Jamaican descent. So you witnessed all the racism that they went through. And then likewise, when I went to school, St. Alphonsus, funny enough, most of the black kids, you know, the Jamaicans weren't Catholic. If you were Catholic in Jamaican, it was like being in the Freemasons. You know what I mean? You wouldn't have been living anywhere as scuzzy as Old Trafford. You'd have been living up the other end where the houses were posher. But we had quite a lot of Indians who were Catholic, you know, from Goa and that area. So they went to St. Alphonsus, but then also Old Trafford had loads of Sikhs. You know, when you used to watch United on the TV, and just behind Ferguson, you see all these big Sikh guys. They're
Yeah.
all Old Trafford guys. They used to go drinking in the Throttle's Nest. And then we had Indians. We didn't really have many Pakistanis back then. They came later, more sort of mid 70s into the area. But it was like when you grow up in an area like that, gives you a unique perspective. So one of the things I did on the word, and I did it on my radio shows too, because growing up in an area like that, you were into reggae, you were into soul, you were into all that other stuff as well as rock and you know and the pop stuff that you'd see. And so that always gave me an advantage in radio because I could go across it all. And one of the first things I did on Radio Derby, and my show was 5 nights a week. For the first year, it was just an hour a night, 6 till 7. And we do a lot of interviews and all the rest of it, bits of politics. But it was supposed to be an access show. And what I wanted it to be was an access show for people from backgrounds like mine. So I had a guy doing a reggae slot every week. Not me. I knew loads about reggae, but I had him. You know, Wes Davidson, Wingsy Levi from the local culture sound system. Two guys who did the jazz funk slot for me, all American imports, 20 minutes a week. Devon Daly and Chris McKenzie from a kind of sound system that specialised in American import funk called the DC Connection. And Devon Daly ended up being Trevor Nelson's producer on Radio 1 for 4 years. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it was that kind of access. And then when I went, and then I managed a reggae band in the mid 80s, got them signed to Chrysalis. That was murder. And then when I got the job on the Word, my first stipulation was if we're having two or three bands, and it's two to start with, then three bands, I said we must have at least one black band on every week. Now, by that, I meant purely skin colour, nothing else. I remember a meeting with one of the producers, and I know what he meant. And we couldn't find a black band that week. And I went, oh, what about Living Colour, who were like a rock band from New York, but all black guys, really good. And they were about to play Brixton Academy that week. And this guy was very, very posh. He went, well, I mean, they're not really black, are they? And I went, well, what colour are they? Because I just remembered my mates. They'd always be thrilled to see somebody who was black on the telly who looked like them. Even if it was just like Kenny Lynch on the Val Doonican show. Do you know what I mean? And or Sidney Poitier film, that was on the TV. And so I wanted to give, especially because we were aimed at young people, the Word. I wanted to give them that buzz of seeing someone who looked like them every week. It
Yeah.
wasn't being woke. I mean, it's not difficult, is it? You've got three bands, pick one black one. And you're going, well, I mean, in the 90s, we couldn't really have Mary J. Blige on, could we? Couldn't have Snoop Dogg on. Do you know what I mean? So it was
Yeah.
like that. And so we did that every week, and it became noticeable. If you talk to a lot of black people of that era, they remember the Word because of that. I mean, obviously, you had like Dance Energy, which was on BBC Two at the time with Normski, but that was a different thing. It was ghettoising it. Whereas, like, the Word was all embracing. Do you know what I mean? It was kind of mainstream, but it was fun. And and then the guests we'd have on, like black comedians like Thea Vidal, what is it? We had Dave Chappelle on, when he was kind of unknown, interviewing, Veronica Webb, people like that, interviewing Spike Lee, interviewing, Eddie Murphy, I interviewed on the Word, so we did that all the time. And that became an important part of it. Other stuff I couldn't affect, I couldn't make better because, I'm dealing with guys who were very public school. And I mean, seriously, my only talent was spotting talent. That's what I was good at. I mean, when I first got the job on the Word, which I knew I'd got because, well, I've been doing like 6.5 years of radio. I'd won 2 National Sony Radio Awards, and I looked good for the time. I looked younger than it was. I was like 29, but I probably looked about 22. I fitted the demographic, and then Manchester was hit. And nobody really with a Manchester accent, other than the odd comedian like Les Dawson or Bernard Manning, had ever been on TV, outside of Coronation Street. So when I got the job, it was kind of based on Manchester just being hit for 6 months. And I was the guy playing all that stuff on the radio in Manchester. So when they rang up looking for someone to audition from Manchester, they rang up about 12 different journalists and they all recommended me, not necessarily for the right reasons. They thought, we'll give him Terry, let them deal with him and his ADHD. Do you know what I mean? And his bitterness and resentment. I mean, for me to have to work then with a load of public school boys, I hated them before I even started. I mean, not on a personal thing, but I mean, I remember we were looking for a female to co-present with me. And we'd audition loads of people, Davina McCall, Terry Seymour, who ended up going out with Simon Cowell years later, Karen Keating, who ended up, was on Blue Peter and all that, God rest her soul. All these people were being auditioned for us. And none of them were quite right. And I said, well, look, there's a woman I've been working with on the radio in Manchester. She'd be absolutely brilliant. Terry, we can't have two people from Manchester working on the same show. And I go, well, why not? But that was just it. They wouldn't even audition her. Series 2 of the Word, they were looking for another female presenter. And I said, well, what about this? Why not audition this woman from Manchester? They gave it to Katie Puckrick, but no. Series 3 of the Word. Again, when I think it was Danny Baird they took on. Again, they wouldn't audition her. I think Carolina Hearn might have been quite good on the Word.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, But
Do
like,
you know what I mean?
oh yeah, yeah. She knew her stuff, didn't she? And
Well, it's not that. I mean, she would have given it a different dynamic. You know, I mean, I remember, but it's kind of with posh people, they always, they almost think that they make up 50% of the UK rather than 3%. I
yeah,
mean, only 7% go to private school, but the sort of posh types that we have on the word, you know, working on its producers and all the rest, they've made up like 3% if that. But they seem to think that they typified it, so we must get someone posh on, you know, which was okay. Do you know what I mean? So we had like Amanda de Cadenet, who was like, you know, absolutely minted. She went to the same school as Princess Anne and
Jesus.
Lady Victoria Hervey, someplace in Kent. You know what I mean? One of these ones where you just have to be really posh and rich, but not particularly bright, which is what a lot of them are. The posher they are, the thicker the kids who go there, because it is basically you spend a load of money to give your thick kids an edge. Um, so you know, so there was that, and I could see. I mean, it's quite cynical to do it. You know, the working class kid and the uber posh girl, but it's kind of it's an interesting idea for like maybe 6 weeks,
Yeah,
and then no one cares. You know, I mean, Amanda was great on it, and you know, she fitted the profile fantastic. You know, because she go out and she get photographed, and she's going out with John Taylor at Duran Duran, and they were huge at the time. But it was a bit, do you know what I mean? If you want to create something more lasting and with a bit more depth, then you would have given it to somebody like Caroline Aherne, who could have brought that proper comedy factor to it. Do you
yeah,
know what I
definitely.
mean? But whether she'd have wanted to do it, really, I don't know.
You said with like getting into media that you've not seen anybody with the same background as you or in all
No.
these years. Did you always feel undermined in the media?
Well, it wasn't so much undermined. It was like, you know, you've got to remember when I worked on the radio, I worked with people like Caroline Aherne, Devon Daly, who ended up, you know, producing Trevor Nelson's show. And these are all people that I've walked through. I mean, you know, including the guy now, Conrad Murray. He's like the number two for SJM, you know, the big promotions, and he manages, you know, co-managed like the Stone Roses, co-manages, you know, Paul Heaton and the Beautiful South, manages the Cortinas, manages the Blossoms, Seblo, you know, loads of people. So these are
Yeah,
the people who work with me. I mean, and then loads of the people who now produce on, BBC Radio and stuff. Um, I mean, just before I got the job on the Word, or at the time that I did, I was working on Britain's first ever officially licensed indie station before XFM called KFM in Stockport. So I there worked with Craig Cash, Caroline Aherne, and then my sidekick on my show, I used to do 10 to 1. I chose this guy. I thought he's brilliant because he said, because you're looking for, I used to call it like aural texture, get two very different voices on. It's no good me having another man come or somebody who's a bit smashy and dicey. You've got to get someone who sounds a bit unique. So immediately you as a listener, that's Terry talking, that's him talking. And the guy I had on had just been sacked from managing a band in Manchester called The Man from Del Monte, who were they used to joke about them saying they were Smiths fans' third favourite band, called John Ronson, who went on to write The Men Who Stare at Goats, The Psychopath Test, and all that, best-selling author. You know, his
see,
books made into movies and lives in New York. So that's the kind of talent I was able to spot. You know, where the guy was the resident poet. I used to always have poetry on my show. The guy was the resident poet on my BBC Radio Derby show, was from Nottingham, really good, a punk poet called Henry Normal. And Henry Normal, I mean, he's always on Radio 4 now, but he set up a little company called Baby Cow with a guy called Steve Coogan,
Jesus.
who did Philomena, Gavin and Stacey, just so much stuff. I mean, you know, but I knew he was good, Henry Normal. And then, of course, he was the one who helped Caroline and Craig sit down and concentrate enough to actually write scripts like The Royal Family and Mrs. Merton. Then when I moved to Key 103 in 88, 89, I used Henry for a while, but then Henry moved down to London. And then my new resident poet was a guy called Lem Cisse, who again is everywhere. Now, when I was on the Word, they wouldn't they just, you'd be there talking to people who didn't have the experience you had. They might have worked for a year on TV or 6 months as a runner on the movie show, but they'd never gone and spotted talent and brought them in. So even in terms of guests, I remember in series one of the Word wanting to get Steve Coogan on. I knew how big he was going to be. And rather than bring him on as a proper guest, they brought him on dressed as Father Christmas, giving out gifts as like some cameo at the end. And you're going, well, you've got no idea. I mean, it's hard to say that, it's cruel of me to say they don't know what they were doing, but they genuinely didn't. They didn't have an idea about talent, because they lived in what I used to call it media babe syndrome. So they live in a 1 square mile radius bubble of the West End of London, and they don't know anything outside of that bubble. Even when it came to booking bands, I mean, the frustration I'd have of arguing about what bands to have on when it's all I'd ever done. I used to play demo tapes on my radio shows. Even when I was in Manchester, KFM, I had a demo chart every week. So the charlatans only want to know was in that demo chart. Fonzie Buller, who died the other week, the Mvita tune, that was in the demo chart. World of Twist were in that demo chart. So it was always about spotting what was up and coming. I mean, the big arguments on the Word were, well, I'm not going to go through every one of them, but the big one was, and this was the reason why I was able to get Oasis on, was at the start of Series 4, they were looking for bands, and we had Paul Ross, and then the guy was the music booker, God rest his soul, is no longer there. But they thought they knew about music, and they just didn't. They were just booking all this shite from London all the time, like new wave of new wave, bad punk type bands, and what they called acid jazz, which was never a scene outside of London. And a scene in London meant 300 people in a club on a Thursday night dancing to a certain type of music. Not really a scene. We call it a night out anywhere else. And so at the start, I'd always think, right, what's going to be a hit? That's good. And I was pretty good at it. My missus, the mother of my kids, that was her job for years. She was a promoter of records to radio and TV. So she would naturally know this is going to be top 10. This is going to be top 5. That should be, but hasn't got the push behind it. So I remember with Craig Cash, funny enough, and he was saying about this great band he'd seen, the Boo Radleys. So it wasn't really my cup of tea, but I knew that song, Wake Up Boo, was brilliant. Nice and up tempo. I thought, there you go. That's your opener for the show. Welcome to the Word Friday night. Kick us off. Band based in Liverpool. The Boo Radleys. Wake Up Boo. And then you're off to a lively start. Friday night, weekend starts here type feeling. Paul Ross and the other guy didn't like him. So they kept making jokes about him. I went, look, I said, it's not about, are you going to sit down and listen to the fucking album when it comes out? These are great, this is a great song. I reckon it'll be top 5 easy. Oh, then there was another band that I was really keen on. That, funny enough, we were going to book a year and a half earlier when Joe Wiley still worked on the show. And they'd just done an EP, but nothing really happened with it. But I'd seen them playing at Manchester University in the Great Hall. And that band were called the Cranberries.
Yeah.
Right? So the start of Series 4, the 2 bands that I insisted we get on were the Boo Radleys and the Cranberries. They got the midweeks on the Boo Radleys, so they knew it was going to be number 2 and number 1 in the charts. So they got them booked. Cranberries, they didn't bother book. Now, the weird thing is, every time I have to walk past Paul Ross or thing, they go, Cranberries, Boo Radleys, as a piss take. So, of course, Boo Radleys, they get on, then they don't get the Cranberries on doing Linger. So they look, and then they went mega. So every time I used to walk past or see Paul Ross and the other guy, I'd always poke him in the chest and go, Cranberries, Cranberries. Listen, I'll give you a told you so forever if you don't listen to me and you get it wrong. So anyway, my ex, her company, Red Alert in Manchester, they used to work loads of the Manchester bands, but also big big labels like Mute and all the rest of it. And one of the bands she worked with in Spiral Carpets. And of course, their roadies were a lad called Liam Walsh, who was then working for my missus, and the other roadie was Noel Gallagher. So, and then Noel Gallagher's girlfriend, who we lived with in Manchester City Centre, Louise Jones, actually worked for my missus as the PA. So, obviously, he was always in her office once he started Oasis. You know what I mean? You know, using the mailing for free to mail out his demo tapes. I mean, even the contract from Creation Records was faxed through. You remember, it used to take ages. It faxes. You're probably too young when you were like, you'd be there for about an hour. And his contract from Creation Records was actually faxed through to her office. So I was under loads of pressure to get them on the word. So what happened was, just before Supersonic was coming out, so we'd have to get them on the last show of the series. It was still going to be a good 3 or 4 weeks before the single came out. But the stories I was hearing from people that I trusted was that they were great live. I'd seen them a few times, but maybe early on. But I had heard the second demo, and I loved that, you know, the live in Liverpool one that they did with the real people, with the swirly red and black cover. You know, and I'd interviewed Noel over that and given him a big write-up in the evening in the Manchester Evening News. So I'm trying to push to get them on. And I'm getting, well, we've already got a band from Manchester booked on that show. Right? We used to have 3 bands on a show. And I said, well, why can't we have 2 bands from Manchester? Well, we can't. I said, well, but you'd have 2 bands from London on, which we'd done. And he went, yes, but that's different. I said, yes, it is. You've not had a music scene since punk in 1976. In the end, the only reason we got Oasis on doing Supersonic was a band pulled out at the last minute. Then Music Booker had tried to go and see him at the Water Rats in Fulham, I think, and he couldn't get in because it was sold out. And because he didn't want me, he was paranoid about the Cranberries. And I was pushing hard. So I got Oasis on. Nobody else, and it took me 8 weeks of arguing the toss. I even invited Noel and Liam down to the show to mither our music booker to his face and put him under a bit of pressure. Now, the weird thing is, by the next series of The Word, you know, because we finished then end of March, early April 1994. The next series won't start till middle of October. And in the meantime, Oasis have gone absolutely mega with the album Definitely Maybe. That came out in July, #1 album. They then started having singles that have gone top 10. Shaker Maker got to number 11. That was the second single. You know, Supersonic got to number 31, which is mega because no one had really heard of them. I mean, it's weird now. I watched a documentary on Britpop, and they were interviewing Steve Lamacq and Joe Wiley off Radio 1, banging on as if they were like playing them every night. I think they played them once, maybe twice, you know, Columbia.
Yeah.
They only pressed up 500. If they'd been playing Oasis every night on Radio 1, easy for me. I just go to Paul Ross and go, Radio 1 are playing them every night. And we get, because I wasn't bothered about who's first. I was under pressure to get them on the word, and a lot of the bands that series haven't been very good. You know what I mean? Because there wasn't much around, you know, in terms of your kind of rock type bands, indie rock bands. So anyway, when Series 5 came on, we had this new editor, Duncan Gray, another posh kid, big mates with Michael Gove, Scottish, but you know Scottish accent, very posh. And he kept saying, Terry, I love Oasis, you know, so we've got to get them on and all that. And I said, yeah, great, of course you should. I said, but my concern is, in the summer, we used to do half-hour edited down versions of The Word, you know, that we'd repackage, and they'd be showing at about 6 o'clock on a Wednesday night. And what concerned me was we used 2/3 of all the band's performances from Series 4, but we didn't include Oasis doing Supersonic. You know what I mean? So I said, well, why didn't we have them on there? Well, so anyway, he's banging on. So we're going to get Oasis on. And then he went, we can't have them on now. I said, well, why not? He said, well, they want to do later with Jules Holland. I said, well, that's fine. Well, no, we want the world exclusive. We did them a favour. I'm going,
Jesus.
Who gives a shit? Well, this is your public school head. All about them.
Yeah, yeah,
And I'm going, nobody cares. Pre-internet days where you can't go on YouTube and watch them. So if you liked Oasis, you'd watch every single thing they were on. You
yeah.
wouldn't say, "Oh, I'm not watching them on the Word. I saw them on there later." And obviously, they're going to pick later because it's got a kind of kudos for musicians more than going on the Word has. Plus, you're allowed to do 2 songs on later. You weren't allowed to do 2 songs on the Word. So we turned them down and had a world exclusive with Dog Eat Dog. And then we had another dickhead who was involved in the music booking. And he was one of them sort of Cockney types. You know the type who, if you said you were going to the moon next week, they'd ask you to bring the sandwiches back. And his insistence was, well, no, I mean, what the word's about is finding new bands and doing this, that, and the other. And I went, no, it's not. It's about finding stuff that's good. And if they happen to be new and a buzz about them, yes. You know what I mean? Just like
Yeah, yeah.
ridiculously making up rules. But again, because they all wanted to find someone like Oasis and bathe in the reflected glow of glory, as if it was all about them. When in fact, what you want is good stuff on your TV show, not all that shit. Sorry, I'm getting all annoyed now, but do you get me?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah.
So you just want good stuff. You don't want
Yeah.
to be playing those games. But and that was, I mean, maybe I didn't need that because I was front of house and getting all that attention anyway. But my concerns, or all I was ever concerned with, the same as when I did my radio shows that won the Sony Radio Awards, was do good stuff. Be something or some where people be a place where people know they're going to see something different. Don't be trying to second guess Radio One or even the music press. They're not necessarily ahead of us. The music press, even in those days, they would hardly review a band from outside of London. The only time they review bands from outside of London is if they went to London.
So, like with Oasis, obviously, they came on and it was a big moment, like you say. Another band that came on that was big was Nirvana. What was that like getting them on?
Well, that was Joe Wiley booking. So, but I mean, they were going to go big because everyone knew that record was a buzz. So the record companies were right behind them. I just remember seeing them in rehearsal, and they were fantastic. They were amazing. But I always felt sorry for the other band that was on because we just had a dance track as a play out that week, and we only had one other live band on, and they were from Manchester called Interstellar.
Yeah.
I mean, in some ways, it wasn't their best song, but they became eclipsed by Nirvana, because of Nirvana being on. And it was like, you know what I mean?
Like when he said the line about Courtney Love, would they like that on the word? Would you like that kind of edginess, or would it be
No,
like,
no, nobody gave a shot, and nobody gave a shit. I mean, you've got to remember, I'd always done when I did my radio shows back in the day. There wasn't all this focus, from like Ofcom and everything. So certainly when I did that radio show with John Ronson, that was on late at night, 10 to 1. And even when I was doing earlier shows, once it went past 8 o'clock, you play what you wanted. You didn't go, oh, there's the F word in this song, or there's this word in it. You just play it. Do you know what I mean? You
yeah,
just
yeah.
play it because it was seen as art. There wasn't this obsession with it all. So really, I was kind of unshockable anyway. I mean, I'm from like a big council estate, so but I think they thought they were shocking people. When he said it, Courtney Love out of whole band Hole is the best fucking. All I remember thinking is, mate, we've overrun a bit. Get on with it, otherwise you're not going to get all your song in. And funny enough, when they did it live, I think that only about a minute and 40 seconds of the song came out.
Oh,
So it all
really?
got edited for the next night. Used to get repeated at about 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, like Saturday into Sunday. Well, Sunday morning, really. So we'd edited some other stuff out in order to put the whole of the record in,
All right, yeah.
the
Well,
whole of the song.
what about L7? Did that shock you?
Well, no, I mean, again, funny enough, I was chatting to her afterwards, and again, she seemed to think that she'd done something that was so far out and punk. But that was a show where we'd had Ollie Reed pretending to be pissed
Yeah,
and
that same
threatens to kick
episode, wasn't
people's heads in. So really, just some. I mean, I didn't think it was a great record anyway. Was it Pretend We're Dead
it?
or
Yeah, I think
Pretend You're Dead?
something like that, wasn't it? Yeah.
I mean, I suppose I wasn't a big fan of grunge. I just felt it was a bit retro. So it was it was a bit like the old mid 70s rock that was around before punk. So if you grew up in a city centre like me, where it was quite urban, the music, like a mixture of everything, that stuff sounded old fashioned.
Yeah.
Whereas if you grew up in a smaller town, if you went to Rochdale, Oldham, Barnsley or whatever, they still be listening to fucking Black Sabbath records now and thinking Rush with a cutting edge.
Did you didn't like that Oliver Reed kind of stunt thing, did you?
Well, I didn't like the settle. I didn't like anything contrived or gimmicky because I was thought when the show was truly spontaneous, that's me. It's my choices. I like to feel like something is happening spontaneously, even if it's bad. At least it's real. You've not set it up.
Yeah.
And what they started to try to do with the word was you had among some of the people who worked there, and I mean this makes it sound as if I disliked them all. I didn't, but it was one of those where they weren't really very good. They didn't have much imagination, but they used to think, hey, you don't have to be mad here, but it helps. And you go, no, mate. So they would try to contrive this stuff that just wasn't good. You saw a lot of it on the Big Breakfast later, where they'd have one joke that might be funny for about 10 seconds, but then they drag it on for the next 2 hours of the show. Do you know what I mean? Where you'd have like, I don't know, Johnny Vaughan and Denise Van Outen, and they go, right, and this morning, close-ups of pussies. And then you get a picture of two cats. But it just dragged on. It just wasn't that funny to start with. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so there was a touch of that about them. And that's what Ollie Reed was. Because you think, what an interesting guy he was. And he was pretending to be drunk, really. He wasn't drunk. And,
Really,
and
yeah.
you kind of wasted him as a guest. It put your other guests a little bit on edge. So it wasn't a comfortable watch. And I mean, maybe if we were about 12, you'd go,
Yeah.
oh my God, this is edgy. But I think if you were kind of watching for something else, because we had Bill Hicks on that show, and that was difficult because he literally come straight off a flight from LA, which is like 10 and a half hours, and come straight to the studio. So he must have been traveling for about 15 hours, completely jet lagged, but he was contractually obliged to do our show because he'd just done his first what do you call it? His first special for Channel 4, so he had to come over. I don't know whether he'd already filmed it or he was about to film it, but do publicity for it
Mm.
beforehand. So yeah, strange. I mean, it's weird. I mean, I do talk. It's not like I've got this instant recall, but I did do a stand-up show based on a lot of this, where I go into
Yeah,
the
yeah.
and outs of a lot of it.
What about like the slap? What happened there?
Well, I mean, again, no idea. I don't think she knew what she was coming up for. What was quite funny about that was I remember this girl coming up next to me and looking at her thinking, what she want? And then she just went, whack. It was a right old whack. But what was funny was because I had season tickets for United. So often on the we always had a great party after the word. There's no other TV show that did it, where it's like loads of beer, bar, and all that kind of stuff. And, it'd go on from when the word finished at 12 until about 3 in the morning. And so I'd always be a little bit hungover because, I mean, I was quite shy. So that tension of doing a show like that, I know I wasn't naturally someone who was out there, you know what I mean?
Mm.
I was more someone hiding behind a mic going, that was a new song by the Smiths, or interviewing someone in that way where I had more time with them and you weren't on edge all the time.
Mm.
And so I used to drink a lot. And I remember if United were at home, I'd have to get up early, get a taxi, get to Euston and try and get back to Manchester for like, midday, 1 o'clock, and then get changed to go to the match. 3 o'clock kickoff. Oh, the good old days of football. So I remember being in this taxi at about 8:30 in the morning, going to Euston Station, and I think the guy had like Capital Radio or something like that on, and they were interviewing the woman who'd slapped me the night before. instant hit because the press absolutely, they were so anti-Northern and they absolutely hated me. I mean, if you read about me, it bore no resemblance to what I was like in real life. I mean, and even when you'd be chatting to people for ages and they'd always make out you'd said things you hadn't said, just to make you sound the biggest dick on the planet. But I remember being in this taxi and it's rattling along and they're interviewing her and they said, so why did you hit Terry? And she kind of went, oh, I don't know. He said, well, was it because he was being a bit misogynistic? She went, I don't know. And then he went, was it because he was being really banal? I don't know. Was it because he was he was a bit inane? I don't know. And that was it. They knew she wasn't a good guest. I mean, listen, our security, when they grabbed her, she wasn't right in the head on the night, whether it was boozing or whatever else. So she gets ushered out of the studio. I go and watch United in those days. Obviously, we won by about 4 goals or whatever. Next day, get one of them crappy Sunday papers like the Sunday People or whatever. But they were good on football. Gossip page. It was slapped Terry Christian was interviewed on Capital Radio. When asked why she hit him, she said, "I just thought he was being really banal, inane, and misogynistic."
Jesus.
And that's how it works in those days. You know what I mean? So quite funny. But yeah, you were on a hide into nothing. I mean, they still do it now, the press. I remember Melody Maker, and two of the bands we had on that week were Mega City 4 and Teenage Fan Club from Scotland. Now, Teenage Fan Club, I love, so their album that had come out about 18 months earlier or whatever, I'd made it album of the week on my radio show. So I was really excited about them being on. Melody Maker, they're trying to slag me off. Then they interviewed Mega City 4 and they were trying to get them to slag me off. And they were saying, well, who cares? It's great we're doing the word and you seem like a nice guy, when we chatted to him. But they didn't want to put that quite in those terms. And then they said, when we asked Terry what bands are on tonight, and he's went, Mega City 4, and then some band from Scotland I've never heard of.
Jesus.
But they do it all the time. And remember when we had Huggy Bear on, and they had like this mini riot in the studio, which is all very staged and everything like that. A bunch of middle class twats from Brighton, really. But it was basically, it was afterwards, so one of the girls lived with the guy who was the assistant editor of the Melody Maker, Hugh Everett, who used to write under the name Everett True. So shared a house with him in Brighton. So, of course, it's all about elevating them and giving them a push, a bit like nepotism. And nobody spoke to me about what went on in the show. I didn't give a fuck. I just wanted to get a drink. I just thought they weren't that good or the song wasn't that great, really. I thought, why have we booked these? But it was like, and then it had, when we asked Terry, he said, how dare they come on my show and do that? Actually some sort of petulant, like, with me head up my arse type thing. How dare they come on my show saying that on my show?
Did you do your editing or did you just laugh it off?
Well, I mean, there was no point because you had no power. There wasn't even an internet that you could go on and say they were talking shit.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you would just, I mean, the weird thing is people would believe that. I mean, it still happens now. It's a trick that they use, especially the right wing press, where I remember doing this thing with Piers Morgan. He's a dick, really. And he goes, so what you're saying is, and then he says something that you haven't said. And then it goes in the paper. Terry said, blah, blah. I didn't say that. Piers Morgan said I said that.
Jesus.
I mean, it's an old trick. They do it all the time. If you're not liked, you're dead. The only way around it back in those days to stop one bunch of public school boys slagging you off was to hire a PR company like Freud's to protect you. But they were basically like gangsters. So you paid one set of public school boys 1,500 quid a month or whatever, could be more, to make sure that even though they might not say nice things about you, they wouldn't say damaging, nasty things about you, or else they wouldn't get. So people like Jonathan Ross was quite clever. He used Freud's. I think Chris Evans did too. So so they would always be shown as being a big success, even though neither of them ever got as good figures as we got on the world. You know what I mean? But it was
Yeah,
like they're all seen as a big success, and likewise, I think later on, even with Johnny Vaughan. So when he did stuff, it. I mean, when he did, was it Naked City with Kathleen Moran? I think he got like the lowest viewing figures of any music show ever. I think it was like less than 500,000, 400,000, but it never got slagged in that way because they had good PR, who were protected, whereas like the Word, there was a bit of resentment from them towards me, and so they would throw you under the bus every week,
really, yeah.
just for the bad press. I mean, I'd be sitting at home and the phone would go. This literally happened. And the guy who used to do the press for the Word used to make stories up, said, "Oh, Terry's had death threats and gone into hiding." Over an item on the show that I hadn't even been involved in making. And it wasn't true, it was all made up.
Did
So
you?
the next thing you know, I remember being at home and I got free satellite dish, when no one had them, because I'd worked the summer between of 1990 for MTV. And because the wages weren't great, they gave you a free fax machine, a free satellite dish, installed it for you, and a card. So you got your sports channels and 2 movie channels as then had all for free. I'll never forget having all my mates around to watch United, at like 4 o'clock on a Sunday. And my phone's going, hello? And it's Piers Morgan. And he said, Terry, I believe you're in hiding. I went, Piers, fuck off. Now, I'm in hiding. He's rung me on my landline at my house. I'm hiding in my house. Bring. Hello? I'm warning you now, don't hang up on me. Do it. I said, Piers, how can I be in hiding? This is my landline. Fuck off. That was the way I dealt with him.
You mentioned there death threat though. Is it true that somebody once made up that somebody was with a gun in the studio on the Word?
Yeah. That was when we had what was it, Jonathan Ross on as a guest.
Oh, really?
And what was interesting, Jonathan Ross said it's going to happen one day. I thought, fucking hell. I hope not. But yeah, I mean, it was all kind of made up, but there was this whipped up hate. I mean, you see it now, if you think about, a lot of you reform voters and people like that, they've whipped up this kind of massive hate as if like every single person who's, is a Muslim is in a grooming gang and, and wants to blow up kids at a concert, so it's like, so we whip up this kind of hate and people's brains go crazy. And they always did that, the right-wing press. I mean, the stuff they used to say about me, it was like the worst presenter on TV ever.
What do you most hated man at one point or something?
Hey?
Most hated man at one point or something?
Yeah, but no, that's just Piers Morgan.
Oh,
I was his most hated man. I mean, the weird thing about Piers Morgan is when I did finally meet him, doing stuff on Good Morning Britain, he didn't realise we had never, ever met in our lives before because he had this really unhealthy obsession with me. I remember when I used to write for the Manchester Evening News and do a page, covering, and that's where the name The Word came from. And I'm like typing in there, the guy sat opposite did the gossip page for the Evening News, Andy Spinoza, the diary page, and he goes, no, that was Piers Morgan on the phone. I'd only done about 4 shows on the Word. It was still like 6 o'clock at night. I went, all right, we'll do it. He said, he's just asked me if I've got any dirt on you.
Jeez, he's a dickhead, Piers Morgan.
No, but what? So then he was working on The Sun. But I mean, I never met the guy. But it was like this weird obsession all the time. And the first time I ever did anything with him was a 2-way, which you'll be able to see on YouTube. And it was me talking about Jose Mourinho taking over as the new manager of Man United. Now, my feeling at the time was exactly what turned out. Was his football's boring? I don't want him there. And at the end, Piers was arguing with me, saying, "Well, I'd have him at Arsenal." I said, "Yeah, well, you're used to boring football and winning games 1-0." I said, that's not the United way." And then at the end, he went, "Thank you, Terry." And I said, "And thank you, Piers. It's the first time you've asked me a question and not made up the answer yourself."
Were he shouting over you? Did he shout over you the whole interview as well, like he always does?
No, no, that's more when you're having debates, when you're debating someone else, but he comes in on their side.
I hate watching his. Jeez. Uh, what's some of your favourite guests on the word that you interviewed?
I mean, most of them were good. I mean, for me, it was the thrill of doing the ones that weren't actually on the show. So, obviously, doing Robin Williams, the very first one in San Francisco, that was May 1990. A good 3 months before the show had even gone on air. Interviewing James Brown, August 1990. And can you imagine having James Brown to yourself for 2 hours? He was in prison at the time. We had to bribe his warders to have a walk around the block. And he was sat at a piano playing for me because the one thing he didn't have in prison was access to a piano. So he was like singing and playing because he'd missed it. Then, I mean, in the studio, Whitney Houston, obviously. I mean, I always quite enjoyed having Boy George on because he always
Really?
well, the thing is, he's just such a great guest, and he represented everything that the word was about, really. That kind of acceptance, but then also not being scared to give a bit of niggle.
Yeah,
You know
yeah.
what I mean? So I always thought he was a great guest. I mean, loads of them. Haley Berry, she was really good when we had her on. I just think anyone who was themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, it was quite awkward for guests because they were, because you were flitting about a lot. And then they were, so part of it was to get them out of the comfort zone, but then another part of it was to try and get good stuff out of them in sound bites, but at the same time, help them feel relaxed enough to enjoy the vibe of it all. So it was it was a very, very, it was the hardest show I've ever done in my life. And I've done a lot of stuff.
Like you say, they used to get in sound bites, little bits. Like when there's a couple of interviews like Shaw Ride with the rape boy allegations and Mark Almond and stuff. Was that to get like something out of him? Would you
Well,
put?
I mean, the Mark Almond one I just knew wasn't true anyway. So it was a load of old shit. The Sean Ryder one, I knew he'd said it was a joke. But yeah, it was a good one. I mean, what I love about it was asking that question. I'll never forget. Like this black lad in the audience went, "Oh no," because obviously there was like, "Ooh, you've asked him that," but that was part of what we did. Do you know what I mean? To be a bit brutal, and it was partly to make you watching it. If you because obviously we were really aimed at 12, 13, 14 year olds to get you on the edge of your seat going, what's going to happen next? So that even throughout the show, you always had the feeling that something might go wrong horribly. So
Yeah,
you carry on watching till the end. And then if something did go wrong, it made your night. And then you chatted about it at school or whatever. And I mean, that's why I didn't like it when we started contriving stuff, because enough things went wrong naturally on the show anyway.
yeah, yeah.
Or things that were funny and a bit different went on the show.
When you look at like TV moments that are funny, like live TV, and they are all accident, like you can tell when it's fake and it's not the same, is it? You don't find it.
Well, I think you can later on. I mean, like I said, I just hate anything. To me, like Chris Evans's stuff. It was all so contrived and gimmicky. There wasn't one single thing that ever happened on a Chris Evans show. I mean, he's a talented presenter, but for me, it was always a bit soulless. The only way I can explain it is I never understood why he did it. I mean, obviously, to be good at it, but he wasn't really into music. He didn't really enjoy interviewing people. He
Really,
wasn't he wasn't about anything. He never had anything to say, did he? He didn't really have anything to say about the state of the music business or youth unemployment or and he's from a council estate in Warrington. He never talked about childhood poverty or all of that. You know what I mean? It was like, I mean, I know he was supposed to be sort of Timmy Mallet, wasn't he? I mean, he was always the image was as if he was a bit cutting edge, whereas really he was just a bit it's quite mainstream, but just with a little bit of wackiness and zaniness there.
Yeah.
So he was kind of seen different to what he'd seen before because he wasn't bland, but do you know what I mean? It was almost like you could see it when he was interviewing someone. He'd have like some mini golf game and he'd get one of the Spice Girls on, have a go on this. You know, everything was kind of contrived. He'd have lines written for him by Danny Baker. And then even the bands, he wasn't, because he wasn't into music. He was a guy, God rest his soul, who I'd worked with at Piccadilly Key 103 back in the day, Pete Mitchell. And when I got the bullet from Key 103 for playing too much weird music, the week of the Stone Roses and the Happy Mondays going on top of the pops for the first time,
Jesus.
the guy who got rid of me panicked and then tried to make Pete Mitchell into me. Now, Pete Mitchell was into like New Order and Joy Division and all that, but he wasn't really banging into the Manchester music stuff, although he did get that way. But then Pete used to book the bands or say, get these on. So that's why, what's his name? Did have like Manchester bands that were up and coming, like Audio Web on. Again, Black Grape, because the Mondays had split up. I mean, it's quite funny when they did TFI, the album. You know what I mean? Like compilation album. And I thought, you didn't have them on. Happy Mondays are split up by the time TFI were on. They didn't exist. You never had Stone Roses on. You had New Order on once. You never had. You didn't have Reef on. I mean, I know they used that track. It's your letters, it's your letters. But Raise Your Hands was on the Word. You didn't have the Boo Radleys on. That was on the Word. But they're all on TFI, the album. So it's almost as if like sequestering the 90s. As if it was them, when really I didn't really think it was that great, TFI. I think if you were like young, if you were about 10, 11, yeah, I think it was. I don't think it was, obviously it was mainstream and they accidentally got some good music on it.
Well, you you travelled the Manchester music scene. What was it like going out to LA with Inspire Carpet?
Well, I don't know. We were out there filming anyway, and they just happened to be there. But we were, so we were doing anything that was so. At that time, when the Inspiral Carpets were in LA, they were doing, I think it was a Roxy, or it might have been the Whiskey. They're next door to each other on Sunset.
Yeah.
And then Happy Mondays were out there recording Pills, Thrills, and Bellyache's album. Mick Hucknall out of Simply Red was over there on holiday, and Electronic were going to play their very first gig there at the Dodger Stadium as a special guest of Depeche Mode, with Bernard Sumner, Johnny Marr, and Donald Johnson even on drums out of A Certain Ratio, and then Neil Tennant with them. So we interviewed all of them, and then the Hacienda night was also on at the Mayan, although it wasn't both Mike Pickering and Graham Park, it was just Graham Park, who I knew anyway from before going to Manchester, because he used to do the garage in Nottingham when I was in Derby. So I knew him from them, and then I employed him. It was me he was working for before he went to the Hacienda. He used to do the House Nation night at this nightclub in Derby that held 800 people called the 20th Century Club on Derwent Street, right next to the river, on a Saturday. So we had a House Nation night, and the other DJ was Simon Baseline Smith, this young black lad who was only about 18, 19. I think he's still DJing now, Simon. But those two. And I remember Graham wanted more money because he only got 70 quid, and he went to the Hacienda for 120, to do a nude night with Mike Pickering. So all of them happened to be in LA. And then I thought, well, let's do a separate item about each.
Yeah.
And instead it was like, Tarquin and Tristram and Sebastian went, no, let's say Manchester's come to LA and package it all up into the one thing, which was like ridiculous, really, because it was as if they didn't realise that Manchester had already had like umpteen hits in America. In the 1960s, there was 1 week in 1965 where Manchester bands were numbers 1, 2, and 3 in the US Billboard charts for 6 weeks solid, from April until the end of June 1965. Manchester bands occupied the number 1 slot in the US Billboard charts. So this was nothing new. Simply Red had had two number ones in the USA. What is it? Hollies had had number one over there, plus loads of like top 10 singles. 10cc had had number one hit with I'm Not in Love. So this was nothing new. And in fact, in the 60s, after the Mersey invasion, the Beatles, they actually referred to it, one of the big magazines over there, as the Manchester invasion because of the Hollies, Herman's Hermits, Freddie and the Dreamers, Wayne Fontana and the Mindbenders, all those bands. So again, it's this perspective. They're in a bubble, a
Yeah.
cultural bubble, West End of London. They don't know about anything outside of London. And yet the irony is, very few of them actually grew up in London. They grew up in some shitty little satellite town in the southeast. And they went to university or whatever in London, or got the first jobs in London. And then they thought, I now live in London. London is cool and trendy, therefore I'm cool and trendy. When in fact, they just weren't. To be into the arts, you have to be outward looking. You can't
Yeah.
be parochial. And what they were doing is they were always making shows for their own bubble. Oh, well, nobody will have heard of Manchester. And the idea that Manchester's going to LA, bloody hell, you know what I mean? You're insane.
Yeah.
Absolutely insane.
With the end of the word, then what happened? It just run its course, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of politics internally against it at Channel 4. Then I went on to do, which I probably shouldn't have done. I did a show for Carlton that was only shown in London called The Big City. And then I was doing a show on Sky, but at the time I didn't have a very good manager. I had a manager who was good at getting your money, but there was no career progression. And then you've got to remember, I'd won two National Sony Radio Awards. I never even got a filling in slot on Radio 1, even though I was doing a show on Channel 4 that was about music. My whole thing was the best specialist music show. I beat John Peel twice,
Jesus,
and
yeah.
they wouldn't even give me a filling in slot on a bank holiday Monday. And again, a lot of that is based on the kind of negative press you got.
Yeah.
And also, people are a bit jealous. And when people are jealous of you, um, they'll never say, well, I don't like him because I'm a bit jealous, or I don't like him because he's northern, or I don't like him because he doesn't like tug his forelock and kiss me arse, as those public school boys expect. They'll find another reason not to like you. Don't make it up. Oh, he's a bit arrogant. He's a bit this. They do it with footballers, don't they? They don't like, you get a lot of racism against black footballers, but they can never bring themselves to go. I think he might have some mental health problems at the moment, or he's lost form, or I believe he's carrying an injury. It's always like he's a bit arrogant, lazy,
Yeah.
toxic in the dressing room. It's all just made up stuff, and people never question it. I mean, I did a course in neuro linguistic programming, and one of the first things you learn is 75% of people believe what they're told. They'll believe the first thing he's a bit snide. They won't think, well, what proof have you got of that? They go, all right, I'll watch out for him then.
Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. Um, so then the word ends when she had some other programs. You got into like reality TV as well, like Big Brother and
Well, again, those are things that I did later on down the line. I think with Celebrity Big Brother, I wasn't that keen on doing it, and I turned down I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here a few years earlier.
oh really?
Yeah, I think maybe the second or third one that they ever did. Um, but it wasn't like a concrete offer, but it was one of them where, see, I'm not really, the only thing I'm actually scared of is heights.
Yeah, same yeah.
So if someone's saying, well, how do you feel about this? How do you feel about that? I'm not asked. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I suppose they're looking for someone who's going to be going, oh my God, I'm surrounded by snakes and bugs. And that isn't me. Even if I was scared to keep it quiet, I grew up in quite a rough area. You couldn't be like that. You couldn't show your fear, your vulnerability. So I think they weren't keen on that. With the Celebrity Big Brother, my mum had just died, and I've got, and I've only recognised it really properly the last few years, but my whole mental state shuts down from, I'd say, the end of November through until around now.
Really, yeah.
I've gone through quite a sort of almost like a depression. Can't get anything done. So because this was in the new year, in January, I thought, well, it'll give me something new to focus on.
Mm.
Obviously, the money was really good. You know, you're not going to get that for 3 weeks' work. And then there was always the hope that you get voted out after a week, you get the same money.
Yeah.
You know,
You got
and
right
the
to,
weird,
right
well,
to
the
end,
weird,
didn't you?
yeah, well, I came second, but it was like one of the weird things was all it is when you Celebrity Big Brother. I can honestly say this, except for the Americans who run it, you know, like Vern Troyer, little, you know, mini me,
Yeah.
Coolio, and Latoya. No one was bothered about winning. You just didn't want to be the first out.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Because of ego. So once the first person had been voted out, everyone's happy to go
Oh, really, yeah.
because you get the same money. You don't get any extra for winning. You get the same money plus you get to make extra money by going on all the spin-off stuff and writing articles for papers. You know, so you can be on, you know, little brothers, big brothers, little brother on the side, and this, that, and the other, and you can write articles for the tabloids, you know, pound a word about you, who's going to win, who I think deserves it, and all that stuff. Shit, really, to be in there till the end.
Did you
But
enjoy
I mean,
it?
I kind of did, yeah. It was quite good fun
Yeah,
because you're
yeah.
away from all distractions. It gets a bit boring, and they make it that way, and they try to create this tension,
Mm.
which again, you know, you get the nickels every now and then, but not really. And I remember one thing I knew that Man United that season had some big important games in the new year. And this is what I said to my missus. So I think we had Chelsea away in the cup. Oh no, Southampton away in the cup, Chelsea away, and someone else. And it was all going to be between United and Chelsea that year, you know, 2009, 2010. And I said to my missus, I said, right, if we have that kind of messages from home, you know, where they send to try and get the tears going, I said, use these phrases. I said, now, if United have won all those 3 games, just say everybody's rooting for you,
Really,
or we're
yeah.
all rooting for you. If not, say, oh, we've been enjoying watching you. That means we haven't won them. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So we have these codes worked out. So obviously, when everyone else is getting their messages from home and like weeping buckets, and I'm there going, we're all rooting for you. Yes. I was like, yes.
Well, did you enjoy doing Would I Lie to You? I like watching that.
Well, again, I mean, that was something that I did when I came out with my mate Steve from Derby. I meant to ring him up last night, actually. But so he was in a band called the Egyptian Kings, and then another band who was signed to Beggars Banquet called the Beekeepers, who were really good. Their lead singer was Jamie East, who ended up working on Big Brother, didn't he? Big Brother's bit on the side and set up Holy Moly. Remember that? Holy Moly. You might be too young, but it was like one of
No.
the first big websites, you know, that everyone went on. And they used to do a thing on it called Cunt's Corner. And that was invented by my mate Steve, who was like the drummer and the hard one in the band. You know, because he'd done boxing and everything. And what he used to do is if someone was getting on his nerves in the van coming back from a gig, was right, you're in Cunt's Corner, sit there and shut the fuck up. And so in Holy Moly, every week, and it normally about some celebrity or whatever, they'd have a section called Cunt's Corner from this. So yeah, my mate Steve, he was the mystery guest on it.
Yeah, yeah.
You
With
know,
the
where we'd been stopped for what was it by the police in
yeah, yeah.
Derby for like a suspected jewel thieves. That was so bizarre. That.
What's life like for you these days, though?
Well, I mean, it's all right. I mean, I'm not very good at focusing, so I've got it was sold out, but I just had extra seats. So I did a show called Confessions of an Irish Catholic at Edinburgh. So that had an eight night sellout run there. So I've just started fixing a few more. I'm the worst organised person on the planet. I need managing by at 65 who wants to. And this is how bad my ADHD brain is. I put some posts out about Jim Ratcliffe, and all his shit about immigrants and everything, his Dave down the pub nonsense where every fact was wrong. I put that out, and then the Daily Mirror uh, emailed me offering me an article about it, and I didn't see the article till I didn't see the email for 2 days, and that
Really?
happened about 6 months ago. Never mind, the Buzzcocks are doing a 1990s special. Emailed me, and I didn't see the email until 2 weeks later. And by the time I saw it, it was the day before filming, so obviously it was too late for that. I got replaced by Clint Boone. So my head is crap, but I've got books to rewrite and a new one that I have been writing. But again, I mean, if you think I've been in the business for 45 years, I never, I mean, it's kind of one of those. I mean, I see people have this idea that you want to be like David Beckham and be at the top all the time, or you want to be like Jonathan Ross, or do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah,
That I haven't got that in me. It'd be nice to have their money, but one of the most overrated things is people recognizing you and knowing who you are. I mean, I've been getting it going, still trying to be relevant, because you give an opinion on Twitter, and you go, well, of all the things I've ever thought in my life, I never thought I was ever relevant. And one day we'll all be dead. So none of us will be relevant.
well, yeah,
I mean, relevance isn't going to pay me bills. And if anything, I would have thought, I mean, even with my kids, so my youngest lad he was 24 just before Christmas. My oldest lad will be 28 next month. But in a weird way, other than Celebrity Big Brother, they have no awareness of me ever being
yeah, like on telly.
recognizable, really. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
Celebrity Big Brother was 3 weeks. They were young, still at primary school, and they still didn't like it because they had like journalists knocking on the door and everything, trying to doorstep, my ex-missus and, take photos of the house and all that stuff. Although for quite positive reasons for, for a change. But they don't like it. I mean, I couldn't imagine what life would have been like for my kids if you were like some, big name star.
mm,
It must be absolutely awful, like some massive cinema star, or I don't know, I think I saw an interview once with David Bowie's daughter, and it kind of messed her life up, and you can see why.
yeah.
Because in some ways it's like, what are your expectations? Is he focused on, you know what I mean? I mean, if
It's
you think
like,
about
it's
someone
like,
like Paul McCartney's done well, with his kids, if you think about
yeah,
it.
yeah,
Because again, it's a bit of a mind fuck, and it's okay because you've got no awareness. If you're sort of David Bowie or Paul McCartney, what you really want to do is make a living out of music.
mm,
So he wouldn't have joined the Beatles thinking one day we'll be bigger than Elvis, that kind of thing. So, and in a weird way, if he did think that, you go, that's a bit scary.
yeah,
It's all right for a little while, when you get a bit of extra attention off women and you get more money and all that. But then, really, what the hell? It's like after a while, is that very validating? The money, yeah, but after a while, you've got more than enough. The attention, like attention off women, that's not validating. They just like you because you're in a pop band or you're on the TV or you're a film star. So it's very strange, what people think. And I think from the outside, then, oh God, he used to be really, everyone more or less my age group knew who he was in 1995. And now he's saying he doesn't like reform to try and stay relevant. Not really.
it's crazy now just from the unemployment, like you said, and you know,
And if you think about my journey into the media, it happened because in 1981, loads of people were made unemployed in Manchester, and then loads of kids spent 2 nights rioting against the police, throwing petrol bombs and stones at them, even laying siege to the police station in Moss Side. And one of them shot a policeman through the leg with a crossbow bolt. So thanks, lads. Gave me a leg up. I'm eternally grateful for every half brick thrown, every shot looted.
Nice one, Terry. Well, thank you for your time. It's been great to speak to you.
All right, cheers, Ethan.